What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a routine interview, only to find himself facing questions that cross every line imaginable? What we're about to uncover will shock you to your core and show you a side of the entertainment industry that rarely sees the light of day. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is unlike anything you've heard before. The studio lights were blazing hot as Tamron Hall adjusted her notes one final time. Her production team had been buzzing with excitement for weeks about landing this exclusive interview. Denzel Washington, the two-time Academy Award winner, was scheduled to discuss his latest directorial project and his decades-long career in Hollywood. What seemed like a straightforward promotional interview was about to become television history for all the wrong reasons. "We're live in 30 seconds, called out the floor director, his voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the television studio. Tamron smoothed down her blazer and glanced across at her guest, who sat with the composed confidence that had made him a legend. Denzel's presence filled the room even in silence, his piercing gaze taking in every detail of his surroundings. "Good afternoon and welcome back to Tamron Hall," she began as the cameras rolled, her trademark smile radiating warmth toward the millions of viewers tuning in. "I'm absolutely thrilled to have with us today the incomparable Denzel Washington. Denzel, thank you so much for being here." "Thank you for having me, Tamron," Denzel replied, his voice carrying that unmistakable gravitas that had commanded respect in boardrooms and on movie sets for over 4 decades. "Always a pleasure to sit down with you." The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. They discussed his upcoming film, his approach to directing, and his thoughts on the current state of cinema. Denzel spoke with the eloquence and wisdom that had made him not just a movie star, but a cultural icon. His responses were measured, thoughtful, and delivered with the kind of authenticity that reminded everyone why he had remained relevant across multiple generations. "You know, Denzel," Tamron said, leaning forward slightly as she prepared to transition to what her producers had told her would be the money segment of the interview. "There's something I've been curious about, and I think our viewers would love to hear your perspective on this." Denzel raised an eyebrow, his expression remaining pleasant but alert. Something in Tamron's tone had shifted, a subtle change that decades of experience in front of cameras had trained him to recognize. "I'm listening," he said simply. "There have been some whispers in Hollywood circles," Tamron continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone about to reveal a closely guarded secret, "about certain compromises that actors, especially successful black actors, have had to make to reach the highest levels of the industry. Some very specific compromises." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Denzel's posture remained unchanged, but those who knew him well would have noticed the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. "What kind of compromises are you referring to, Tamron?" he asked, his voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Well," Tamron pressed on, apparently oblivious to or choosing to ignore the warning signs, "there are persistent rumors about certain rituals, certain requirements that the industry's power brokers expect from actors who want to reach your level of success, particularly from black male actors." Denzel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed directly on his host. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakably cooler. "Tamron, I'm going to need you to be very specific about what you're suggesting here, because I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're implying." "I think you know what I'm talking about, Denzel," Tamron replied, her journalistic instincts apparently overriding any sense of caution. "The entertainment industry has always had its dark secrets, and there are those who say that certain sacrificial elements, certain spiritual compromises, are expected from those who achieve the kind of sustained success you've had." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Denzel's expression had transformed from pleasant interview demeanor to something far more serious. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio pay attention. "Let me make sure I understand what you're suggesting," Denzel said slowly, his words deliberate and precise. "You're sitting here, on national television, implying that my success, my 4 decades of work, my commitment to my craft, is somehow the result of what, exactly? Some kind of occult activity? Some kind of Faustian bargain?" Tamron seemed to realize that the conversation had taken a turn she hadn't anticipated, but rather than backing down, she doubled down. I'm simply asking about rumors that have circulated for years, Denzel. Surely you've heard them. The question is whether there's any truth to them. Denzel leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Tamron's face. You know what, Tamron? I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen a lot of things, heard a lot of nonsense, and dealt with my share of people who prefer conspiracy theories to hard work and talent. But I have to say, this might be a new low. I'm just doing my job as a journalist, Tamron responded, though her confidence was clearly beginning to waver. These are questions that people are asking. People are asking? Denzel repeated, his voice rising slightly. What people? What credible source has given you reason to believe that my success is built on anything other than dedication, talent, and the grace of God? Because if you have evidence of some wrongdoing, some spiritual compromise, as you put it, then by all means, present it. But if you're just repeating gossip and innuendo, then we have a serious problem. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Production assistants exchanged worried glances, and the show's producer could be seen frantically speaking into his headset from behind the cameras. This was clearly not going according to anyone's plan, least of all Tamron's. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Tamron tried to backtrack, but Denzel wasn't having it. No, I don't think there's been any misunderstanding at all, he said firmly. I think you came into this interview with a specific agenda, and that agenda was to suggest that successful black men in this industry must have sold their souls to get where they are. That somehow, we couldn't have achieved what we've achieved through legitimate means. That's not what I was implying, Tamron protested, but her words lacked conviction. Then what exactly were you implying? Denzel asked pointedly. The cameras continued rolling as Tamron shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly realizing she had opened a door that she couldn't easily close. Denzel, I was simply exploring the broader conversation about power structures in Hollywood and how certain individuals navigate them. Don't dance around it, Tamron, Denzel said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority. You used the word sacrificial. You used the word spiritual compromises. You weren't talking about navigating power structures. You were making very specific accusations wrapped in the guise of innocent questioning. Tamron's media training kicked in as she attempted to regain control of the interview. These are conversations that happen in entertainment circles, Denzel. Surely, as someone who's been at the top of this industry for decades, you've heard these discussions. You know what I've heard? Denzel leaned forward, his eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded everyone why he'd been so convincing in roles where he played men who wouldn't be pushed around. I've heard ignorant people suggest that successful black people, whether they're in entertainment, business, or any other field, couldn't possibly have earned their success legitimately. I've heard people say that we must have cheated somehow, compromised somehow, sold out somehow. That's not what I'm suggesting, Tamron interjected, but Denzel wasn't finished. Isn't it though? He continued, his voice gaining strength. Because when you sit across from a black man who has worked his entire life to perfect his craft, who has studied Shakespeare, who has trained at prestigious institutions, who has dedicated himself to excellence in every role he's ever taken, and your first instinct is to ask about dark rituals and spiritual compromises, what exactly are you suggesting? The studio audience, which had been invited to witness what was supposed to be a feel-good interview, sat in stunned silence. Some looked uncomfortable. Others appeared fascinated by the unexpected turn of events. The producers were now openly panicking, with several of them huddled together behind the cameras, clearly debating whether to cut to commercial. I think you're mischaracterizing my questions, Tamron said, her professional composure beginning to crack under the pressure of Denzel's unwavering stare. Am I? Denzel asked rhetorically. Then let me ask you something, Tamron. Have you ever asked a white actor about the spiritual compromises they made to achieve success? Have you ever suggested to Robert De Niro or Al Pacino that their decades of success might be the result of occult practices? Or is this line of questioning reserved specifically for successful black men? Tamron's face flushed as she realized the corner she had painted herself into. Denzel, I think we're getting off track here. My intention was never to offend you or to suggest anything inappropriate about your career. Your intention? Denzel's voice rose slightly, though he maintained his composure. Your intention was to get ratings by perpetuating harmful stereotypes and conspiracy theories. Your intention was to suggest that a black man couldn't possibly achieve what I've achieved through talent, hard work, and dedication alone. That is absolutely not true, Tamron protested, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier in the interview. Then explain to me, in clear terms, what you meant when you asked about sacrificial elements and spiritual compromises, Denzel demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're suggesting that successful black people are somehow in league with dark forces. It sounds like you're promoting the same kind of thinking that has been used to diminish and delegitimize black achievement for centuries. The weight of his words settled over the studio like a heavy blanket. Even the technical crew had stopped their usual bustling around to focus on the exchange happening in front of them. This was clearly not typical television fare. I was asking about industry practices that some people believe exist, Tamron said weakly, clearly grasping for any way to justify her line of questioning. Some people believe the Earth is flat too, Denzel shot back. Some people believe that the moon landing was fake. Are you going to give airtime to every conspiracy theory that makes the rounds on social media? Because that's essentially what you've done here today. I'm a journalist, Denzel. I ask difficult questions. No, Tamron. Denzel's voice was now filled with a disappointment that was somehow more cutting than anger. Journalists ask difficult questions based on facts, based on evidence, based on credible sources. What you've done here is repeat gossip and innuendo, and try to dress it up as legitimate journalism. There's a difference. The executive producer's voice could now be heard clearly from behind the cameras, though the words were muffled. It was obvious that there was serious consideration being given to ending the interview, but the cameras kept rolling. I respect your perspective, Denzel, but I think you're overreacting, Tamron said, attempting to regain some semblance of control over the situation. The moment those words left her mouth, the atmosphere in the studio shifted dramatically. Denzel's expression hardened in a way that made everyone present understand that a line had just been crossed. Overreacting? He repeated slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm overreacting to being asked, on national television, whether my success is the result of devil worship or whatever nonsense you're peddling. I'm overreacting to having my life's work reduced to conspiracy theories and dark fantasies? I never said devil worship, Tamron protested. Spiritual compromises, sacrificial elements, dark secrets, Denzel listed off her earlier words methodically. What exactly did you think you were implying? And don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know exactly what those phrases mean to your audience. Tamron looked around the studio, clearly hoping for some kind of intervention from her production team, but none came. She was on her own, facing down one of the most respected actors in the world, and losing badly. Denzel, I think perhaps we should move on to discussing your upcoming projects, she suggested desperately. Oh, now you want to move on? Denzel asked, his eyebrows raised in apparent amazement. After dropping these accusations, you just want to pretend it never happened and talk about my movies? That's not how this works. They weren't accusations, they were questions. Questions based on what? What research did you do? What sources did you consult? What evidence do you have that would justify asking such questions? Denzel's training as an actor was evident in how he controlled his voice, projecting authority without shouting, commanding attention through presence rather than volume. Tamron's silence was answer enough, and everyone in the studio knew it. That's what I thought, Denzel said quietly. You don't have any evidence because there isn't any evidence. You're just repeating internet conspiracy theories and hoping they'll generate clicks and views. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Tamron made one final attempt to salvage the interview. Denzel, I understand you're upset, but these are conversations that happen in Hollywood circles. I'm simply bringing them to light. Bringing them to light? Denzel's voice was incredulous. You're not bringing anything to light, Tamron. You're spreading poison. You're perpetuating the kind of destructive nonsense that has been used to tear down successful black people for generations. I think that's an unfair characterization, Tamron replied, though her voice betrayed her growing desperation. Is it? Denzel stood up from his chair, his imposing presence filling the studio space. Let me tell you what's unfair, Tamron. What's unfair is sitting across from someone who has dedicated their entire life to their craft and suggesting that their success is somehow illegitimate. What's unfair is using your platform to spread conspiracy theories instead of celebrating excellence. The cameras captured every moment as Denzel began removing his wireless microphone, his movements deliberate and purposeful. The production team was now in full crisis mode, with multiple people speaking frantically into their headsets. "Denzel, please, let's continue the conversation," Tamron pleaded, realizing that her exclusive interview was about to become a public relations nightmare. "The conversation?" Denzel paused in his microphone removal to look directly at her. "What conversation, Tamron? The one where you accuse me of making deals with dark forces? The one where you suggest that a black man couldn't possibly achieve success through legitimate means? That conversation?" "I never made any accusations," Tamron insisted, but her words rang hollow in the charged atmosphere of the studio. "You know what you did," Denzel said firmly. "And more importantly, everyone watching knows what you did. You took conspiracy theories from the darkest corners of the internet and tried to legitimize them by asking them as questions on national television." Tamron made one last desperate attempt to keep him seated. "Denzel, please understand that my role as a journalist requires me to ask challenging questions." Denzel stopped removing his microphone and turned to face her fully, his expression a mixture of disappointment and righteous anger. "Don't you dare hide behind journalism, Tamron. Real journalists ask challenging questions based on facts, based on evidence, based on credible sources. What you did here today was not journalism. It was character assassination disguised as curiosity." "That's not fair," Tamron protested weakly. "Fair?" Denzel's voice rose for the first time during the entire exchange. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I have to sit here and defend my life's work against baseless conspiracy theories? Is it fair that successful black people are constantly subjected to suggestions that we must have cheated or compromised or sold our souls to achieve what we've achieved?" The studio audience was completely silent, many of them clearly uncomfortable with witnessing what was supposed to be a promotional interview turn into such a heated confrontation. The magnitude of what was happening was not lost on anyone present. "Denzel, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Tamron tried once more, but her words carried no conviction. "The only misunderstanding here," Denzel said as he successfully removed his microphone and placed it on the small table between them, "was my assumption that you would conduct this interview with the same professionalism and respect that I've experienced throughout my career. That was clearly my mistake." "Please don't leave," Tamron said, her professional facade finally cracking completely. "We can move past this and talk about your projects." Denzel looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening slightly, but his resolve remaining firm. "Tamron, let me explain something to you. When you invite someone onto your show and then ambush them with conspiracy theories and innuendo, you don't get to just move past it. When you suggest that a person's life's work is somehow illegitimate, you don't get to pretend it never happened." "I wasn't suggesting your work is illegitimate," Tamron said desperately. "Then what were you suggesting?" Denzel asked pointedly. "Because when you ask about sacrificial elements and spiritual compromises, you're not asking about my acting technique or my directorial choices. You're asking whether I've made some kind of deal with dark forces to achieve success. Do you understand how insulting that is?" The executive producer finally decided to intervene, stepping into the camera frame for the first time. "Mr. Washington, perhaps we could take a quick break and discuss this privately." Denzel turned to look at the producer, his expression making it clear that there would be no discussion. "There's nothing to discuss. This interview is over." "Denzel, please." Tamron made one final plea. "I apologize if my questions came across the wrong way. That wasn't my intention." "Your intention?" Denzel shook his head slowly. "Your intention was clear from the moment you started asking about dark secrets and spiritual compromises. You wanted to create controversy, you wanted to generate buzz, and you thought you could do it at my expense." "That's not true," Tamron insisted, but everyone in the studio could see that she had lost this battle completely. "You know what is true?" Denzel asked as he prepared to leave. "The truth is that I've worked for over 4 decades to earn the respect I have in this industry. I've studied, I've trained, I've dedicated myself to excellence in every role I've ever taken. I've tried to be a positive example, not just as an actor but as a man, as a father, as a member of my community." His voice carried a weight that made everyone in the studio hang on every word. And you want to reduce all of that to conspiracy theories and dark fantasies. You want to suggest that somehow, a black man couldn't possibly achieve what I've achieved through talent and hard work alone. Denzel, please. Tamron tried one more time, but he was already walking away from the interview area. I've heard enough, he said without turning around. I came here to talk about my work, my craft, my passion for storytelling. Instead, I was subjected to the kind of ignorant speculation that I thought we had moved beyond. As Denzel reached the edge of the studio set, he turned back one final time to address not just Tamron, but the cameras that were still rolling. To anyone watching this, let me be clear. Success in this industry, or any industry, comes from hard work, dedication, talent, and sometimes a little bit of luck. It doesn't come from dark rituals or spiritual compromises or any of the other nonsense that gets spread around by people who would rather believe in conspiracies than acknowledge excellence. With that, Denzel Washington walked off the set of Tamron Hall's show, leaving behind a stunned host, a panicked production team, and what would surely become one of the most talked about television moments of the year. The cameras finally stopped rolling. But the damage was already done. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had instead become a master class in how quickly things can go wrong when preparation meets poor judgment. What did you think of Denzel's handling of this situation? Was he right to walk off, or should he have stayed to finish the interview? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of entertainment that you won't hear anywhere else.